the Sugar and Spikes podcast, a show for everyone trying to navigate business and life without losing their minds. I'm Dez, a coach and consultant who is entirely overeducated, habitually overdressed, and obnoxiously honest.
And I'm Tammy. I'm a psychologist. Was I supposed to say more?
You know what? Enough said. We talk about mindset, mental health, and making it all work in the big, bad business world.
One quick note. We may be mental health professionals, but we're not your mental health professionals.
So, enjoy the show! Hi guys, welcome to another episode of the Sugar and Spikes podcast. I'm Dez.
And I'm Tammy. I thought we weren't doing that anymore.
Well,
you know who we are.
Old habits die hard, right? Let's see. I really want to say happy Sunday morning, but it's not Sunday when we upload these.
I know, but it's Sunday today.
It's Sunday when we record. It's also very early.
It is early.
Well, it's later than we intended, but you know.
But time change.
Yeah.
So still early.
Later. Technically, it's later.
Oh yeah, it is later.
Which I think is why I'm so awake right now. Okay. So this week, I don't know, one thing that came up last week and a couple people kind of commented on after the episode with Noelle was I had mentioned people in your industry and stuff are kind of watching you and they notice when you're doing well, when you're not really doing that great, and not necessarily your boss or anything, but you'll get feedback from other folks, right?
Did you give examples?
Yeah, in the episode, we were talking about networking and everything.
Okay.
And when you're in an industry, people kind of get to know you, and there's more openness for not indirect feedback, but feedback from outside organizations. And when you're an entrepreneur, getting feedback from folks that you don't necessarily work with, but in a professional context.
Oh yeah, brilliant. Okay, sorry, I've been under the weather, everybody.
Yeah,
so
she's been dying a little bit.
A little bit.
And that was one thing we kind of wanted to dive into a bit more this week was the idea of feedback. And as one thing that's not really talked about is as you progress in your career, if you're an entrepreneur, you bring staff on. If you stay in a job or in an industry for a minute, you gain seniority and end up supervising.
Yeah.
And so many people talk about accepting feedback, but we really don't talk about how does it feel to give feedback.
Yeah.
And to be in a position where one day you're giving feedback, the next day you're receiving feedback, and just this continuous flux of navigating that situation. Because speaking from experience, when you're giving feedback, you're still trying to appease the other person, in a certain sense. There's definitely some, not saving face going on, but I still want you to like me because we all want to be liked.
It's hard to give constructive feedback. It's hard for me. I know other people have said it's hard for them.
Yeah.
I think it's just something it's like any other skill. You have to learn how to do it, and it gets easier the more you do it. Because it's not easy to tell someone that they're messing up, because it's not easy for them to hear, and you don't know how they're going to respond to you. And I just think there's so many factors that make it difficult.
Yeah. I mean, there's a class on it in grad school.
Yeah.
Everyone's they don't teach you this shit. I'm they do. You just haven't made it far enough. But I mean, thinking about the times that I was learning to give feedback and everything, it's one of those things where you so clearly can see pieces where you're you can grow in this way. And it comes from a place of wanting them. For most people, it comes from a place of wanting them to grow. And this wouldn't be our podcast if I wasn't like completely honest, where sometimes if you're giving feedback, it could be towards the person where you're like, yeah, I don't like you and you're really fucking up right
I
now. And
know.
learning how to balance that. Like, how do you like pull out the like interpersonal pieces and still keep it like completely neutral and professional?
So I think when you like really don't like somebody, you
Mhm.
have to think and consider even more kind of deliberately and thoughtfully how you're going to
Mhm.
give feedback to them.
Yeah.
Because you kind of might enjoy kind of stomping on their ego a little bit if you're
Because
not.
I'm a terrible person.
No, like if you're not a fan,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like I get that. Like we're all human.
Mhm.
Um but so I think it requires even more thoughtful consideration to
Mhm.
be a respectful supervisor,
Yeah.
boss, manager in
Mhm.
that moment and to
Mhm.
be able to say, I recognize that this is a problem, not to the person obviously,
Mhm.
but to say
I don't like you. You don't like
I
me.
know.
Here's the list of shit you need to improve. Next.
But, talk it over. Like we talk so much about having like that trusted person
Mhm.
um that you can go to, and I think that that's important to talk it out. Like even
Mhm.
even sometimes just acknowledging like I really don't like this person and I don't know how I'm going to do this, and kind of
Mhm.
thinking it through
Mhm.
can make it better.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it doesn't have to be like this deep. Sometimes I wonder if people get the idea that like we're thinking about like deep, thoughtful, like meditation and consideration. And I'm not saying
And
that.
write a thesis
Yeah.
about your feelings about this person.
But really, just even a quick conversation with
Mhm.
your trusted person
Mhm.
to say, I don't know what I'm going to
Yeah.
do. Maybe try out some things or get their feedback about how they think, you might approach it a little more,
Mhm.
in a little more healthy way can do wonders than trying to just kind of wing it.
Yeah, and I think it's that self-awareness, right?
Hmm.
I think for the most part there's a certain level of professionalism that inherently comes into play when it's, God, I really don't like this person and I have to like do this review or whatever. Like, that's your chance to grow as a professional.
Hmm.
Put your personal feelings aside because if you have that awareness of I don't like them and this is happening, then if at that point you choose to let your personal feelings get into it, then that's on you and that is kind of an indicator of like a lack of professionalism,
Yeah.
you know?
Hmm.
And a bigger growth edge than
For
maybe you
you.
were realizing.
Yeah. So maybe you have some growth to do too.
Mhm.
I mean, I like to think that we're always learning and growing,
Mhm.
right? Like we never get to this point where like I'm a professional and I know
Mhm.
everything, like I have a doctorate and I still learn and
Mhm.
grow, and I love to learn new things. Like, oh,
Mhm.
I hadn't thought about that before and how I incorporate that and move forward. So
Mhm.
like I think it's really important to always be learning.
Mhm. Well, and everybody's getting feedback from somebody, right?
Even if it's
Like
just the universe.
even if it's just the universe, and we talk about how like entrepreneurs can't really like function in a silo, even if
Yeah.
you are the one leading the charge in your business and it's like solely owned by you and stuff like that. It is important to have someone else that you can hear when maybe there are concerns or like someone who sees an area of growth. But that's also like that's one thing Tammy and I had to navigate as partners was giving each other feedback because as well as we work together, our working styles aren't exactly like, you
The
know,
same.
the yeah,
No, they're not.
no. And that was one thing where I don't know. I mean, do you kind of want to talk about that piece? Like navigating that?
Well, it's interesting going from being friends to being business partners,
Mhm.
because I think it just adds a layer
Mhm.
where I think, like, do I say something? Do I not? How
Mhm.
do I say it? And, like, I tend to be a little more laid back, I think,
Mhm.
and you tend to be more structured.
Mhm.
Um, so it's learning how to compromise with those two things rather
Mhm.
than, like, well, I'm really laid back, so I don't get what her problem is. Or you're like, I'm really organized and I don't get why she
God,
is.
what's she
Yeah.
doing?
But recognizing what everyone brings to the table and kind of
Mhm.
finding a compromise and a balance in there.
Mhm.
Um, so like recognizing I don't do things on maybe as tight of timelines, but I do get them done, and
Mhm.
recognizing that you need a little bit more like organization up front
Mhm.
and like working with you on that piece.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And I think one thing that's helped, um, particularly around like the podcast and everything, is define check-in times.
Mm-hmm.
Like, especially when you work with a friend or if you work really closely with someone and if you're in like a startup and stuff like that, where worlds blend so much more than they do if you work at like a Fortune 500 with
Right.
thousands of like things get really murky
Murky.
really fast.
Mm-hmm.
Is like these defined times, right? Like using meetings for the meeting's purpose and being really intentional of how are you feeling about the podcast? How are you feeling about the talk? Like, how are you feeling about how we do this? And giving that very defined space,
Yeah.
because then like, it opens up anything that could become like a growing conversation. I don't want to say like a negative conversation, but like
A growth
a growth
conversation.
conversation in a very defined space.
Yeah.
And maybe this is just because of like our training and everything, but then after that conversation's done and we like move from like that room into another area and another topic, everything's cool,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So that's
Like,
separation.
yeah, it
Mm-hmm.
really it feels weird sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you don't grow, you don't you don't improve in comfort.
Yeah, I mean, you and I have had conversations where you were like, I had no idea you were feeling that way.
Mhm.
Like, and it brings me to kind of this point that I've been thinking about is one of the number one things to taking feedback is kind of trying to keep those emotions in check,
Mhm.
right? Like, when we hear, not that I was saying negative things to you, I've kind of moved on from that, but whatever. Um, like, when we hear things that could be considered criticism
Mhm.
or constructive or growth,
Mhm.
I think we instantly have an urge very often to defend ourselves
Mhm.
and to feel attacked sometimes,
Mhm.
even if it's said in the most gentle and loving way. Like it's hard to hear those things.
Mhm.
And so, um, but to resist that urge
Yeah.
and to kind of take a deep breath and
Mhm.
really lean into it and
Mhm.
hear what the person's saying.
Well, especially as entrepreneurs or someone building a business or with a really defined career trajectory, when you get that feedback, like you've poured your life's blood into it. I know grad school for you when you got like those edits on your dissertation
Oh,
and just like things like that, where
yeah.
under most circumstances it should be fine and like so like it'd be really easy for someone to be like, okay, take it, move on. But when you're invested and when you are like deep into it,
Yeah.
any sort of like you forgot an apostrophe on it's.
I
Why don't you love me?
know. I worked so hard on this.
I'm sorry that all I can do is shit. Like, oh my god. Like it blow like it can go so much further, so much faster than anyone really expects
Yeah.
because of that investment. And that's good. Like in one way that's really good because things will change. You know, you want it to do well. You want things to succeed in all of that stuff, but in another, like if you don't rein that in, if you don't just like kind of sit with it until your emotions chill out a bit, then things could explode a lot faster.
Yeah. I know when I got that first round of edits, I had to like read them and set it aside
Mhm.
and then like do some things and then go back and read them again.
Mhm.
And I know that on second reading, I'm like, okay, these aren't so bad.
Mhm.
As whereas the first, I'm like, this is a fucking catastrophe. Like, I
Mhm.
just need to rewrite the whole thing, right? Like,
Yeah.
it wasn't like that. It was, and the thing is all that feedback and the changes that I
Mhm.
made my project stronger,
Mhm.
more comprehensive, and better,
Mhm.
right? So if you can kind of think about constructive feedback
Mhm.
being like, you really want this to do well. Well, the person who's giving you the feedback also wants it to do well. And
Mhm.
these are ways to get there,
Yeah.
right? So instead of like letting it destroy your sense of
Mhm.
competence and your sense of self and all of that, um, if you can kind of reframe how you're thinking about it, like,
Mhm.
oh, yeah, she wants my project to be stronger. Oh, yeah, he wants me to succeed and he's
Mhm.
seeing these things that are getting in my way.
Mhm.
Then I think it's easier to hear them, take them in,
Mhm.
figure out how you're going to deal with them.
One thing that I don't think is really talked about is what happens when the person that's giving you the feedback, like, what happens when feedback turns into bullying?
Oh, yeah.
Because I'm thinking about it right now and it's just like I was talking with someone and they were saying how they are realizing that they need to like readjust like their response to feedback because they've come out of a situation where like their former boss was just like would tear apart everything
Mm,
and now like they're with another team and everything and it's legit like constructive or like positive and things are good and but when they get like the round of revisions or whatever, like their stomach sinks and they have that like gut reaction, and it's like,
it's like
oh
a
shit,
trigger.
like no, no one really talks about that, like kind of, yeah, almost like recovering from that piece.
Well, that's part of that initial reaction versus
Mm-hmm.
responding.
Yeah.
Like that self-awareness of, oh yeah, because my former boss did X,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm feeling this.
Yeah.
Okay, let me take a minute,
Mm-hmm.
calm myself, whatever I need to do,
Yeah.
and then remind myself I'm not in that situation
Mm-hmm.
anymore. What do I think the purpose of this set of revisions
Yeah.
is, right?
Yeah. And that I was talking with them and I was like, you know, you don't want to like blur like your situation with a previous situation because you don't want to bring that drama into a good situation.
Right.
And if you enter into like immediately getting defensive or stuff like that or like going into a meeting with that vibe and that like almost standoffishness, you're going to breed a negative situation.
Right. So you can kind of bring about what you're trying to
Yeah.
avoid. I agree. Um, so that's the leaning in
Mhm.
and recognizing your first emotion or reaction. Don't do that.
Yeah.
So, like, even if I just say, thank you so much for the feedback,
Mhm.
I'll figure it out. Or even
Mhm.
if I just say thank you, like at the
Yeah.
moment, what's you're saying is something.
I don't know what my saying.
Oh, you have one, but whatever.
I don't I'm not sure.
But you do.
Damn it. About feedback?
Yeah, like thank you so much for the feedback. Um,
I know I say thanks for the
that's
feedback.
what you say.
Oh. Yeah.
I thought you said something else. Whatever. Cut this part out.
I want to know what my brilliance is
I
though.
know it's bothering me.
I mean, I'm a big fan of simply leaving it at thanks for the feedback, and I've done that a lot with people. And if you're ever looking for a way to decide if like someone has like your growth in mind versus their ego in mind, when they give you feedback, simply say thanks for the feedback and see how the hell they respond.
Mm. And just stop talking.
Yep. Be okay with silence for a bit. Watch some facial expressions. See what happens.
Yeah. Like, you can also say thanks for the feedback. I'll look into that.
Yeah.
Like just things to buy
Mhm.
yourself some time,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I've definitely been like, "Thanks for the feedback. Can we talk about this late? Can I take some time?"
Well, and I think it's important if they really have your growth in mind that hopefully they'll be open to further conversation. And then
Mhm.
kind of, if you can do it in the moment, then kind of like, what are their intentions?
Mhm.
What are they trying to get at? Like telling you these things?
Mhm.
Like, are they really stressed out? Are they, um, do they really have your growth in
Mhm.
mind? And if they don't, then I think it's a great opportunity to take Noelle's advice and start looking for another job.
Yes. Also asking for examples, because
Asking for specific examples.
there's nothing worse than, like, vague, general.
General, yep,
Jesus
the
Christ.
worst. Like, "Oh, thank you so much. Do you have a specific example
Mhm.
in mind?"
Yeah.
Right? And then, also, like, so repeating back what you heard them say. So
Mhm.
this is what I'm hearing, like, am I
Yeah.
getting that right? So
Mhm.
when we're emotional, we don't always
Yeah.
hear what we think we're hearing. So
Mhm.
kind of taking that opportunity either now or later to say, this is what I heard in the meeting, or this is what I'm hearing right now.
Mhm.
Is that, am I understanding you correctly?
Yeah.
And then kind of getting a handle on that.
Mhm.
And then I would say, if you can come up with some action steps in the moment, great. I'm not one of those people.
I was gonna
I need a
say,
minute. Like,
yeah.
I really need a minute. So I'll say, thank you so much for the feedback.
Mhm.
I'm going to figure it out. I'll provide you with a plan.
See, I'm a huge fan of that. We were looking at an article, and kind of the segue isn't great, but that there was an article that we were going to kind of talk about, and maybe we'll just cover it super briefly, but like 7 steps to taking harsh criticism from your boss. There's an article on Inc. And one thing that we do want to kind of bring into the podcast is this idea of looking at business media and,
Seeing if we dig it.
yeah, figuring out if it's good, if maybe if they have some room for growth. A segment that I personally love to refer to as good shit or bullshit. Um, but one thing that does come up in it is, there are a couple pieces, but to what we were just talking about, like suggesting an action plan, like
Yeah.
essentially troubleshooting in the moment. I'm not a fan of that. Like,
Yeah.
even if you can, even if you're like super, I don't want to say disconnected, but super able to be like, okay, I hear that and I see these next steps, like X, Y, and Z. Next time I'll do that. Even if you can see it in the moment, thank them for their feedback.
Yep.
Like, my favorite move is, thanks for your feedback. Let's talk about this next week. Like, if it's a one-on-one or whatever.
Yeah.
I'll come back next week with my thoughts. I really appreciate your time.
Mm-hmm.
Finishing up whatever else needs to be done in supervision and then moving on. Because even if you've figured out what they want in the moment, coming back and framing it up as, I had a chance to think about it, shows you're invested, and it shows that you were listening, and it shows all these other things. And chances are, even if you thought about 2 or 3 steps that you could take in the first meeting, a couple days later in the shower, you're going to come up with like better things.
Yeah. So I agree with like 1, 2, and 3, right?
Okay, so let's go over them.
Okay,
right?
so
Okay.
1 is distance yourself from the situation,
Mhm.
which is really all about like reining in those emotions, right? So I agree with that.
Yeah.
However you want to, I don't know that I would call it distancing yourself, but I would say don't go with that initial reaction.
Thanks for the feedback. Can
Yeah.
I take some time?
Yep. And then try to understand your boss's intentions. So I talked about that, right? Are they stressed?
Mhm.
Are they like wanting to see you grow? Like how
read
right?
read the room.
Read the room.
Read the room and look at it in context of your larger relationship.
Yeah.
You know, like if things have been going great and then suddenly you're at like a quarterly review or something, or if your business partner comes to you with all of these like grievances, then I think even in that moment, like, it ties to taking space, like, oh, this is unexpected because, and use examples, this is unexpected because last week you said X, Y, and Z, and things, okay, thanks. I need to process.
Because if you're like totally, so I personally hate when, well, hate's a strong word. I am not a fan of when the quarterly review
Mhm.
is like, surprise, here are all these things.
They should never be surprises.
They should never be surprises. You should know what's coming in your quarterly review. So, like, if this is the first time you're hearing about it, you're going to be shocked. You're just going to be. Like, so take a minute.
Yeah.
Like, it's okay. Like, it's not going to end. Like, the world's not going to end. Like, you can be like, oh, I'm really blindsided by this. I didn't realize this was an issue. I'm going to think about it, blah, 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 whatever, right? So summarize the criticism, right? So take a moment, think about what they mean, right? And what they're really trying to say.
And summarizing is great because it can actually neutralize a lot of things.
It can neutralize, and also it gives you a chance to correct errors. So, like, if I didn't really understand what you're, like, you say, like I say, so I heard you say this, and you're like, that isn't quite what I said. Let's talk about this further.
Like, if I said, like, Tammy, I'm concerned because we haven't recorded a podcast. And you're like, so what I hear you saying is you're not paying attention and lazy. I'm like, no.
Yeah.
How are things going? Right? Like, they're...
Because we all have our own perspective, and we don't know necessarily what's gonna trigger the other person and, like, lead them to, like, infer or assume, make assumptions about things that you said that wasn't what you said.
Yeah.
So, like, what they hear and what you say might be two different things. So this is the opportunity in the first meeting to do a really basic check-in and correct that, so you're not walking away thinking something happened that didn't happen.
Yeah, and that's basic, like, that is communication and active listening 101. Even if it's not feedback, if it's any sort of conversation, if you want to, like, strengthen a connection with someone, then summarize something that you heard, because either they'll correct you, because everyone's going to correct you if you're wrong, because people want to felt heard, and if you're right, then that shows you're actually listening and actually invested in the conversation. So summarizing, like, if you don't know what to say, like, feedback or not, like, if you don't know what to say, summarize.
Yep. You can always add, so if I'm understanding you correctly, this is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
And then say whatever. Because it always leaves room. If you say, if I'm understanding you correctly, it always leaves room to say, I may not be. And so am I right?
Yeah.
Right? So I kind of like that. I think it's like a neutral way to enter into those kinds of conversations. So then step 4 is explain your perspective. Now,
we have the same response.
So it does go on to say, once you've calmed and distanced yourself, rebut with your own explanation.
I don't know.
And it says now it does say the purpose here isn't to counterattack, and you don't want to get defensive, but that's where this gets really tricky. Because explaining your perspective can lead to seeming defensive. And once somebody's labeled you as defensive, everything you do then on seems defensive. It's just like, stop being defensive. And then when you try to explain yourself more, you just seem more defensive. So it's like,
it's hard.
It's so tricky.
It's so hard because, like, even, and I was thinking about this when we were talking about, like, trying to understand your boss's intentions piece and the, oh, I'm blindsided because of X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
I think that if you keep it to facts.
Yes.
I'm really surprised that you're telling me I'm not doing a good job, because last week you told me you were happy with the progress.
Yeah. That's a factual thing that happened.
Yes.
Right? So you want to stick to facts, not feelings, right? Is it a feeling? Is it a fact? If it's a fact, feel free.
Yeah.
If it's a feeling, don't do that.
Yeah.
I mean, even in this example, they were like, can you explain why? Like, is the toxic work culture preventing you from doing your best? I don't know that that's something I would bring up to my boss.
I would label that as bullshit.
I would be like, really? That's just what are you talking about?
Yeah, no.
So I think the next one is, are you missing software that would make your job easier? So if you need things that would really help you, then that can be part of your action plan.
Yes.
If you just say, well, I don't have this, then you sound defensive. It sounds like excuses, right?
Mhm.
But if in the action plan you say something like, I was thinking about what could make organization better, and I thought
Mhm.
maybe I could use XYZ platforms or software or
Yeah.
whatever to help me,
Mhm.
that comes across much better than, well, I don't have
When you've
this.
done the work, like, so much of this is people just wanna see you doing the
And
work.
then it says, do you lack direction or supervision? I'm like, uh you can talk about if you have like, if you have good relationships with your supervisor,
Mhm.
then I don't think this is the time to talk about it.
Mm-mm.
But at some point, you can have a conversation like, "Oh, this is how I take direction best," or "This is what really works for me. Like,
Mhm.
I need a little bit more direction because
Mhm.
sometimes maybe they aren't providing it. What you
Yeah.
like that goes back to work styles, right?
And knowing your work style,
Yeah,
like, that's why I do the fast at 5 and stuff, like, when you know how you work and when you know how people around you work, it gives you a shared vocabulary, and it kind of operationally defines a lot of stuff.
yeah,
So then that takes away it goes back to kinda like the summarizing, like, you're working from the same language,
mm-hmm,
and it clears up a lot of confusion and even just in working styles, like, okay, I know I got this done, but I haven't seen X, Y, and Z come through from this other person. Well, I know they work better at night. Okay,
let's wait
I'll
till
wait until the
tomorrow.
morning.
Yeah, or like, and it goes back to our original conversation too, which is that you work in a more structured, deliberate
Mhm.
way, and I work in a little bit more relaxed way.
Mhm.
And so, understanding that, we've been able to accommodate that in each other, not by me coming super organized
Mhm.
and not by you becoming super relaxed, but kind of recognizing like we can ease up on our own points of view a little
Mhm.
bit and see like the value in the other person and how they're working and let them work that way.
Also, I think one thing is for as much as like you may think you know yourself, perspectives can be different
Yeah.
because just an example, and this is like with like our working styles and everything is like personally I feel like I have one of the most laid back working styles, but if you hear something from like three people that don't know each other, chances are they have like a better perspective
Yeah.
than you
If
do.
you're hearing it consistently from a lot of people.
Because I've heard that I'm, like, organized and detail oriented from so many people, and I'm like, "Really?"
But you are.
It's kind of like oh my god, this is a really bad comparison, but, like, when addicts are like, "I don't drink that much." "Oh, but sweetie."
But you do.
"But you
Or
do."
like the time I told you, like, I think I'm a type B personality. And you just started laughing. You're like, I don't, what are you even saying right now?
Yeah.
But like, that's my view of myself. I think of
Mhm.
myself as a really laid back person.
Mhm.
But you're like, no,
Yeah.
that's not the case.
So, I mean, have an understanding and maybe, like label it, but then check in with people that know you best. And it doesn't have to be a direct check in, like you don't have to sit down with your boss and be like, "No, tell me." But look for those keywords
Yeah.
and look for themes that keep popping up. Because if people are noticing things about you without you trying, then that shows this whole area of strength you
Mhm.
may not be aware of
Yeah.
and something that you can like seriously capitalize on. You
Totally.
know, because once you start naming it, like if you hear it from a handful of people and then you start naming it, people are going to see it more. And then if it comes naturally, also, if you start focusing on it, then you're just going to kind of kick ass at doing it,
Right?
you
So,
know?
like, the example for you, like, where you're like, I had no idea I was detail oriented. I'm like, but you are.
Mm,
And other people are like, you
you know, they
are.
really are.
So then you can look at what am I
Uh
doing
huh.
that is detail oriented, and then you can recognize this whole
Yeah.
special area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like yeah, like professionally and everything, it shifted into other roles and stuff that I would have never thought about trying for,
Yeah.
but have been really good. You
Yeah.
know, like, yeah. So I don't know. Listen for the trends.
But engage in, or sorry,
Oh yeah, sorry. Totally got off.
explain your perspective.
Mhm.
Eh, eh.
Ooh, stick to the
Stick
facts.
to the facts if you're going to explain.
And
But
one
really,
thing,
thanks for the feedback might be a more appropriate
thanks for the
comment.
feedback. And like also going back to reading the room and everything, is it worth it? Like, is
Yeah.
it worth it to explain your perspective? Because sometimes it's just not. Like,
Yeah, go explain it to your best friend.
Yeah, go talk about it, get your feelings out. One thing that really stands out is the, like, why it, like, I forget where it is.
It says, "Can you explain
Can you
why?" And then
explain
the examples they give, I'm like, "No."
well, this makes me think about something, and I know you and I are totally guilty of this, is using, like, "I feel."
Oh,
A
yeah.
lot, and I
Mhm.
think that's because of our training and everything.
Yeah.
But one thing I've started actively working on these last couple weeks is subbing out in like a work context, subbing out "I feel" to "I think."
Yeah. It's
You
Yep.
know? Like, it makes a huge difference. It keeps it even more neutral. And we've talked about why, like, "I think" and "I feel" statements are kind of the best way to go about putting things out there. Um but I read this thing that said millennials are just like hooked on "I feel X, Y, and Z," and I was like, "Oh yeah."
Okay, whatever.
But it's totally a thing because like folks have what started off as a therapy tool has turned into this cultural thing
Yeah, I
where everyone's
know.
like, "I feel blah blah. I feel that 2 + 2 = 4."
Right?
Yeah, I mean, it just does.
But really, like, very often, so from a therapeutic point of view, people talk about what they think rather than what they feel, and
Mhm.
so it's a way to get them in touch with their emotions.
Yeah, but when
But
you're
you don't wanna be in you don't necessarily we're not asking for emotions in
yeah
these conversations.
yeah
Yeah.
like unless it's
We're asking for your thoughts, we're asking
mhm.
for facts, we're asking for data to support
Insight.
insight,
Yeah.
data to support what you're saying, data to
Mhm.
support what I'm saying,
Mhm.
right? Like, these are not times for feelings.
Yeah.
No, I agree. And so, engaging in a dialogue, we talked about that. Yes, maybe not in that first meeting.
Yeah, no.
So, I think the time is um, to have your feelings, feel them, have your
Mhm.
reaction, not in front of your boss,
Mhm.
and then to come back later. And my hope is that if you have a good boss,
Mhm.
it can be more of an ongoing
Yeah.
conversation. And if you don't have a boss who's willing to do that,
Mhm.
take Noelle's advice and start looking for a new
Yeah.
job.
Because yeah, everyone gets caught up in the "this is the only option I have," which, oh boy, I was there. Like, I was 100% there.
Yeah.
Um, either like, we've talked about starting your own stuff, and in this day and age, it's completely so much more feasible,
Hmm.
or talk with someone who is like a career not career coach, but someone whose job is to place folks,
Yeah.
like my interview buddy and stuff
Hmm.
like that, like unexpected pitch. There are people whose jobs are essentially professional matchmakers.
Yeah.
You know? Like if you're in a shitty relationship, you're going to get out of that relationship
Hopefully.
ideally.
Right.
If you're in a shitty work situation, there's someone that can help you get into a not
Another one.
yeah, like
Something that's
just
more positive. You don't
mhm.
have to stay in a bad work situation. I know sometimes we feel that way because we
Mhm.
feel like, oh, it's the security, it's the security, it's the security. But
Mhm.
really, I mean, at what point is it not worth it
Yeah.
anymore? You know what I mean? At what point is your emotional, mental, physical,
Mhm.
even health
Mhm.
worth this shitty job?
Yeah.
Right?
And we've had people in the podcast talk about like physical reactions to bad jobs.
Well, yeah, because our health
Mhm.
our physical health is tied into our emotional and mental health.
Mhm.
And if we're in a work situation where we're at 8 to 10 to 12 to whatever hours a
Mhm.
day, that's a majority of our day being
Mhm.
and then when we're subjected to stress, our levels of
Mhm.
cortisol go, right? Like
Yeah.
there's all these physical reactions that
Mhm.
break down our physical health.
Yep.
So staying in that situation, no bueno.
Yeah. It could be a stopgap, and if it's a stopgap, then find like self-care things to do.
Yeah.
But career matchmakers, they're out there. Use them.
Yep. And then step 6, suggest an action plan. So once you've settled the dialogue, suggest an
Mhm.
action plan.
Yeah.
Maybe your boss has outlined one for you. Okay, how can you add to it? How can you be creative with it? Whatever.
I think the thing is, in terms of professional growth and stuff, criticism and feedback is not necessarily the time to stand, like to take the it's not the time to stand your ground.
Yeah.
Like, even e- even if you feel like you're in the right, I think,
Ah.
see, I think that if someone brings up a concern, even if in that moment it's maybe not, then chances are that came from more than just one example.
Mhm.
Look for it and grow. Like, if you can't,
It's not our job to reject it out of
yeah,
hand just because we feel bad about it.
and in your career, no matter where you are, if you're a business owner, entrepreneur, manager, whatever, if you're not continuously like being self-reflective and looking for ways to improve, you're doing a huge disservice to yourself.
Mhm.
So, suggesting an action plan, even if you think that a lot of the feedback was like bullshit and you're not happy about it, what's one thing where you're like, I, I think that I'm okay in this area, and you know what? Why not? Why not grow a little bit? Take that,
Yeah, so
run
different
with it,
perspective, right?
take a different perspective and come up with a growth strategy so that you can tailor it to really like fit the needs you think you have, the needs you identify, and that you can get on board with versus fighting it,
Yeah. Like, rather than
because
thinking of all the ways they're wrong, think,
mhm,
how could they be right? How
yeah,
could this be true?
mhm,
How could this be the way they're saying? And
mhm,
if they're providing examples, then they're
yeah,
providing factual things that have happened.
mhm,
And so it should be easy to see,
yeah,
oh, okay, so in maybe it's 3 specific instances out of a
mhm,
million or whatever, but
yeah,
how could I have responded more effectively in those 3 situations that they're
mhm,
describing as problematic?
yeah,
How can I grow when those circumstances
mhm.
happen again so that I'm not responding or reacting in that same way?
Yeah, and making the action plan objective and concise where you can, like, if you put numbers on it or something like that, where then once you take those action steps, you can say, I've done this.
Mhm.
Then if your boss or your business partner is still harping on the same stuff, then that's one of those indicators maybe it's an abusive business relationship,
Right, because
you
you're like,
know?
"Well, I did the whole action plan. You agreed that I did it. I don't understand."
And you're
Yeah.
still telling me that
X,
X,
Y,
Y,
and
and
Z is a
uh-huh.
problem. And
Then
it protects you too.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So step 7 is consider giving criticism of your own.
That can only go well.
Right? I'm like, great advice. And it's like, especially if your boss was unhelpful in the process, I'm like, especially if your
No.
boss was unhelpful in the process, don't do this one.
No.
Like, no,
No.
don't.
This is just so bad. But one thing it makes me think of is I worked for an organic grocery store
Yeah.
one time. And one thing that was really cool about the organization was we had essentially like review the reviewer or something,
Mhm.
where everybody would give feedback. Like if you were like hourly line staff or whatever, you gave feedback about your manager
Yeah.
and stuff like that. I think that that's super beneficial.
I think there's a place for that.
Mhm.
I don't know that it's when you're
Not
getting.
during your quarterly review
Oh
or
my
follow-up,
god.
no.
Like, you just criticized me, so let me tell you
Okay.
how you can
Oh,
improve.
so that's how it's gonna be? Okay, well,
Well, here
get
we go.
your notebook
I
out.
know.
You ready, Becky? Let's do this.
It's so ridiculous. There is value in critique of managers from the perspective of like lower level staff.
Yeah.
When you are getting corrective feedback from said manager,
It's not the time to
it's not the time.
No. And I mean, really, it goes back to a defined time and place,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Like during review the reviewer season, good time with the appropriate paperwork and
So
stuff like
keep
that.
notes.
Like, yeah, I mean, definitely if your interactions with your boss, like if it's like an habitual or ongoing thing, have those examples so then when there is a time and space for it, then you can be the one that has the, well,
Here
here's
are
an
some
example.
specific facts.
So you can keep to the I think because of,
Like, where's the evidence?
yeah, versus I feel like you're just picking on me.
Right.
Well, I think that maybe there may be a bigger underlying issue because per the improvement plan we had, I fulfilled X, Y, and Z. And last week you said that there has been growth. I think there may be miscommunication. I think something may be overlooked, things like that. Like if you have an example,
Yeah.
cool.
As evidenced by.
Exactly.
Yeah.
During the appropriate time.
Not in this conversation or
Yeah,
subsequent
no.
conversations.
I would say that that would be another, like, bullshit
Yeah, don't
piece.
do that.
Don't do
Don't
that.
do that. But if you think we're wrong, tell us
Yeah,
why.
let us know.
As evidenced by,
Please give us
please.
a great example of when you did that and
Right
you,
after
like,
you
yeah.
got growth feedback and it went well for you.
Yeah. Yeah. After in the same meeting, someone gives you feedback and you're like, "Okay."
You explain your point of view and you give them their own corrective feedback. I want to hear about this because this is like,
I'd be amazed.
I would be too. But if you have
I'd
a
love it.
story,
Yeah,
I want to hear it
yeah. Let us know.
because that will then possibly change my perspective on things. And I'm always learning and always growing.
Exactly. Okay. I feel like that wraps it up for this week.
Yeah.
We'll talk to you later.
Bye, friends.
Hi everyone, it's Noelle from MyInterviewBuddy, and I wanted to talk to you guys about something that makes us all feel super uncomfortable, and that's dealing with tension in the workplace. Oh, I mean, it is just the worst, right? That terrible feeling in your stomach of having to see somebody or see people that you just don't get along with. It's so isolating, and you just don't even want to come to work because it's so stressful for you. So, what do you do when this occurs? So, the first thing that you're going to want to do is talk to a supervisor. Now, often this can be the hardest step because you just don't want to place blame. You don't want to be poking the bear in any way. But this is how we're able to solve the issue, is by having tough conversations. So talking over with your supervisor gives them an opportunity to try and make things right, understand what happened, and try to take some next steps to help smooth things over, and to also get a perspective of what happened on the other person's side, so that everyone's able to come back together and make things work. So talk over with your supervisor. And your next step is, if you can't talk to a supervisor, and sometimes your supervisor will send you in this direction, over to the HR department. So your HR director or manager should be able to mediate between you and the person or the people, and what had happened and how to move forward. Again, it's not about blame. It's not about who said what. It's about, this is what the issue is. How can we communicate this better? How can we solve this problem better so we don't have this issue in the future? It's about moving forward, and that's a big piece of what HR is supposed to do. So you need to just take that step. I know it's uncomfortable, but having that conversation with HR is so important because you need them to be advocates for you, and you need everybody to be on the same page. It also gives you an opportunity to hear the other person's side and to come up with next steps as a company on how to make things better. So let's say that your HR director is somebody that's an issue with you, or you don't have HR, you're in a small company, and your supervisor is not somebody that's going to be able to be an advocate for you. So what do you do then? Well, this is where it gets a little bit sticky because we have to take some super bold moves. Now, this is only for small issues. I'm not talking about racism or sexism or sexual harassment. I'm just talking about a small issue. Maybe there was some kind of a conflict from a conversation, or it's just super tense over an issue. But what you're going to want to do is to reach across the table and have a conversation with the person or people that are giving you a hard time. This is so uncomfortable, I know, but I think it's so important to have tough conversations. Brene Brown does amazing work on having tough conversations. You guys definitely need to check her work out. But it's all about just getting it out of the way, because what happens is that we blow things out of proportion and we play a story in our mind on how things went, and that person may be thinking of things completely differently. We can't bridge the gap until we've had a conversation. So maybe you take the person out to lunch, or you keep it simple and just have a short meeting with them and say, hey, this is what I'm experiencing. I'm not quite sure what's going on. I really want to let you know that this is the way that you're making me feel. Whatever it is, be transparent, but be open to hearing their perspective of things and work together on finding a solution. So, again, this is for a small issue, but you just don't want to let this be a thread that keeps getting tugged and tugged and the whole thing unravels because of one bad incident. You guys can patch this up if it's a small issue. So, you're also going to want to just be your pleasant self. Now, I'm not talking about being fake or not organic to who you are. I'm talking about just, coming into the office and saying hi to everybody and not having your head down. I mean, that's what's going to help you not feel so isolated, because you just have to have that conversation of just being friendly, being yourself. How was your weekend? Get that out of the way, and it just makes things a little bit more normal, and it also is going to help with the tension in the office overall, because even if you're having an issue with one coworker, everybody feels it. So just try to smooth things over by being yourself. It doesn't mean that you have to apologize, you have to take any blame, or you have to have a confrontation. It's just about being as normal in the office as possible. But you know what? Sometimes it is a big issue. Sometimes it's racism or sexual harassment. There's sexism, or maybe it's just become a super hostile workplace because of a small thing that's gotten completely out of control. Well, if this is the issue and you like your job, I would really consider going and speaking over to an employment lawyer. This is going to seem like a really scary thing to do, but I think it's so important for you to protect yourself. If you're being forced out of a position because of a hostile work environment or discrimination or ageism, you need to be able to get somebody to be on your side to help you through this next transition, which may be to force your company to act correctly, or leave your job and get a severance that is due to you for being forced out of your position. So along with that, it's time to start looking for a new job. And it's so unfortunate, especially when you like your day-to-day job, but when you're in a hostile work environment, it is so unhealthy to stay there. So it's important to just take a step, take a stop, and just move forward and find something that makes you feel good. So these are my tips. I know that it's so uncomfortable dealing with that kind of tension, but until we have the conversations or we take the right steps, it's never going to get any better. And we all deserve to work someplace that we feel wanted, where we are needed, and where we can feel happy. This is Noelle from My Interview Buddy, and I'm wishing you a wonderful day.